Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Alex.
Right here.
And also, we have two very special guests with us. We have Shawn and Becky. You are mission workers for, let me get this right, it's not just through CCC, because I think, people see you here and think, oh, it's just CCC, but you're involved in a lot of different aspects of mission work, correct?
Yes, we are.
Correct. We wear a couple different hats, but primarily we're employed by Comma Services, Compassion and Mercy Associates.
Right. Yep. Okay, great. Yep. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about, your lives and mission work and what that looks like. So before we go any further, though, we have to ask the three questions. We have three questions we ask of every guest. And so people, you get both answer them individually, they're not joint answers. So first question, have you ever had a nickname? If so, what is it? You guys can...
I know what yours is.
Flip a coin or something.
Yeah, so for a while, my real name is Rebecca. And so I had some friends calling me Reba, but it didn't last very long. But Becky's already a nickname for Rebecca, so.
Okay.
There it is. Okay.
Acceptable.
One of the ones that I had was Benson and Hedges. Actually, I was Benson and my best friend was Hedges, and that's a cigarette brand, and there's a whole story behind that. So
it's like a Hall & Oates thing.
Yeah, that one was kind of short-lived. Yeah. Do I any other ones? We grew up together, so she knows all my nicknames, right?
I can't think of any others.
And we don't need to know every nickname.
Yeah.
Like if you guys have nicknames for each other and things like that, we don't need to know that.
That would be uncomfortable.
Yeah, that would be uncomfortable.
And we don't want to be uncomfortable.
Not that kind of uncomfortable. So thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Benson. And Benson, just Benson.
Benson. Okay. Yeah, I was
All right, second question. If you had a warning label, what would it say? Like warning
Benson or warning Reba.
Yeah. ...
Mine would be like caution, really nice guy.
Oh, okay.
Is that because you don't look like it?
No, I'm legitimately a nice guy.
Okay.
I'm a blue. I like people. I care for you.
Okay.
So,
seriously.
I don't know, but my friends just gave me a mug that says, had a picture of me on it, and then it said Becky McCabe, and it said, I don't mean to interrupt. I just get really excited about something, and I want to share it with everybody. So I think caution, I have a lot to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. You're a good person to be on here. It seems like they made that for you to work
Friends
out.
that know you well and still love you. That's the best thing in the world.
Love it.
All right. One more question. What is the last book that you read?
Currently reading, last book, Becoming Whole by Finkard. So it's the one before When Helping Hurts. It's kind of the prequel. Okay. Excellent book.
Anybody working in poverty alleviation should be reading it. So, honest answer, Runaway Bride by Judy Hedlund.
Yes. Okay.
My favorite genre of relaxing reading would be historical Christian romance, but she's a great author. And at the same time, I'm also reading Hands, and it's a book by practitioners in our Alliance Alliance Missions world. And it's stories from the field about community relief and community development.
Cool.
So, you should read
are
it.
you a big Francine Rivers fan?
Yes, I do like Francine Rivers. She's not my favorite, but...
Okay.
My wife, she likes Francine. And so you mentioned Alliance, you mentioned Comma. I think maybe our average listener, because they don't even all attend CCC, might not understand fully the Christian and Missionary Alliance, which is the denomination we're a part of, which was really birthed out of not like planting a bunch of churches, but was more of a worldwide movement. And so can you explain to us a little bit about like what Comma Services is, and maybe from your perspective, why you've chosen to be a part of the Alliance family as missionaries and things like that?
Yeah, so our history is actually pretty deep when it comes to work overseas. I'm a third generation missionary, if you will. International worker is the lingo we use these days. And Becky is second generation. So, we haven't been around since AB, but we've been around for a while.
Yeah.
So Comma Services was kind of birthed in 1972, I think, is the year, and it was kind of part of that Indo-China conflict. You had Vietnam, you had a bunch of refugees coming over into Thailand, and so in those refugee camps, the Alliance actually created Comma Services to deal with the relief efforts that were happening during that time. And our presence is a lot bigger in Southeast Asia, but we're growing in Africa, pretty much around the world, in Europe as well. Yep.
So we're often referred to as the relief and the development arm of the Christian Missionary Alliance. So a lot of our workers are community development workers, humanitarians would be a way to describe a lot of the work that we do.
Gotcha. And we'll talk about kind of what you both do and where you're serving at, but just for protection, we won't talk about maybe exactly the names of the countries and things like that you guys serve in. So if people at our church, you might hear something and you're like Googling, where in the world is this country? It's probably because we have code names that we'll use as well. So
sounds good.
Don't ask Google where Gold Kingdom is, because you might be confused. And so, you guys want to tell us a little bit of your story, what you guys specifically do right now inside of missions. We know you're in Africa, in a country there. What does that look like? Do you both do the exact same thing? You're running different ministries. Tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing there.
As comma workers, I think our natural bent, a lot of us have gifts of compassion and mercy. And so when you're a comma worker, when we go into any community, two things are really important. Gospel access. We want to be working with people who don't have access to the gospel. So we're working with unreached people groups. But more specifically, we're working with marginalized and vulnerable people. So anytime we've ever moved into a community, it's just like, God, give us eyes to see the marginalized and the vulnerable. Sometimes that can be the handicapped. It can be women and children. For me particularly, it's been child labor. So Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest percentage of child labor in the world. So when we began a ministry, it really began a preventative work to keep girls out of prison from preventing committing infanticide, which is really a significant issue. In our prisons, most of the girls and women in prison have committed infanticide. Which means they've either...
Okay, you're going to tell us. I was like, what?
People always look at me like, what is that?
What is that?
It means they've either abandoned or murdered their newborn babies. So our work, it's called Hands of Honor, is what it has evolved to. It started in 2013, but really started out of a prison ministry, working in a women's prison with a lot of teen girls. And most of them had committed infanticide. They get 5 years. And most of them had abandoned their babies. So they would leave it on another person's doorstep, hoping that somebody would find their child. And what I quickly realized is that these girls don't have the heart of a murderer. They're living with incredible guilt from a decision that they really made out of desperation. When we talk about the cultures that we're working in, our honor and shame cultures, and so to leave and abandon their child is the lesser crime than going home with a child and bringing shame on their family. And so just out of that work and seeing these girls and just thinking, what if there had been a safe place in our community that they had another choice? Could we have that? Could our local churches be that safe place? And so that's where Hands of Honor has evolved. So in our communities, it's a church-based program where we're providing a safe place for vulnerable teen girls, primarily child laborers. They've come from small rural villages in a situation of poverty. Their parents have to send them into the workforce in order to provide enough money for the rest of the family. And so when they're in our cities, they're just incredibly vulnerable to promiscuity and then also a lot of abuse, sexual abuse by their employers. So that's how we've birthed our program. And so we're really just a safe place in our community. We've added a lot of different elements to our program and the training that we provide for the girls. But that's always been my heart, is just every community I go into, I'm saying, where are my girls, God? Where are the vulnerable and the marginalized girls in this community that need to encounter you in their brokenness, encounter you in their in the difficulty that they're walking through. Yeah.
I think in the American culture, maybe we make jokes about child labor, like, your kid's mowing his lawn, that's, child labor. But we also know there's reality about this happening cross-culturally, but we don't maybe see it as much in the U.S. So what does that look like? What is like child labor? Are there ages, or what are the labors they're doing? You said that their parents would send them. Are they sending money back to their parents, or what does that specifically look like?
So is it 7 kids on average, right?
Yeah, the average fertility rate in a lot of the countries that we're working in is around 7. So just think most families are like, the old time families that around this area were probably, 9 to 10 kids or whatever.
Wow.
So that's still pretty common. So oftentimes it's actually, they can't feed every mouth that's in the household. So they do, it's the better choice for them is to send one of those children to the city to work.
Because then they are fed by their employers.
Yeah. And the idea is that person's working and they're sending back money if they can. That usually doesn't happen that way too well.
Yeah.
But that's
there's
the idea.
a lot of injustice because there's no government or social justice system or any kind of monitoring of this. So child labor is still very much culturally accepted. It's not like it's 10. So the youngest we've ever had in our program is 10. Usually the average age we get them is about 12 and 13. So usually by the time these girls, the older ones that we get in our program, they've already been working as a child laborer for 5 or 6 years. And so what it means is their parents send them in the fall into the city to work as a maid. So they're living in a stranger's home. So it's not all bad. Some girls really get in a good home. They're well cared for. They're fed. They're looked at as like another member of the family. Yeah. The majority of the girls we work with, though, have been in situations where there's, they don't get fed. They work 24/7. They get paid $15 a month. At the end of the month, their employer will say, hey, listen, I can't cover your salary this month. Can you just wait till next month? Or like you dulled this knife or you chipped this plate, I'm going to take X amount out of your salary. So that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with girls in those types of environments where we're advocating for them with their employer and saying, hey, they gave you an honest, day's work. They need an honest day's wage. And so it's a big part of what we're doing now is we're bringing awareness in our communities too, like saying this needs to change. When we first started this program back in 2013, I'm working with pastors' wives and Christian lay women who are like, there's nothing wrong. I remember one of our staff one time, everybody has house help because everything's still done manually. You're cooking over a fire outside. You're washing your clothes by hand. Mm-hmm. So if you can afford it, you're going to hire a maid. So one of our pastors' wives had this maid, and she went she told her to go to the market because they go to the market every day. Nobody has a fridge or anything. So they go out and buy their fresh stuff every day. And so rather than hand this girl this money, she like threw it at her. So all these coins are like rolling away. And I'm just like appalled. I'm like, that's terrible. And she turned to me, she says, oh, she needs to learn her place. Like, so just humbling her, making her. So that's the reality when we started working with our staff, like the ones that are supposed to be helping in this issue. And we've just seen God change their hearts, like give them a different lens, like just break cultural beliefs and values for these girls and just really see them through God's eyes, worthy of dignity, worthy of value. And so right before we came on home assignment, we had this staff training, and it was just really cool to see all of this staff. They're almost like mama bears. And they're like, and I'm talking to this parent to make sure they're not getting this daughter married at this age. And I've been talking to this employer and saying I'm going to move take their house girl, move her somewhere else if they don't start treating her better. And so it's just really cool to see how they've even evolved over the years and seeing the importance of these girls being treated like they're worth through Jesus' eyes. Yeah.
It's crazy. And I don't think we can understand if you haven't walked in a country like we think of everything in our context, like a refrigerator and a house and they're cooking a meal. Like everything takes so much time and so much more effort, so much more money. So it's just literally a different world than we can even listen.
So all the chocolate that we eat here in the U.S., you guys have probably heard it on different social media and things, but a lot of that chocolate is child labor. It's where the majority of the young boys go and work is in the chocolate in Ivory Coast. So it's an issue all over West Africa. Yeah.
And when you hear things like that, proportionately throughout Africa, they do have, modern cities in Africa, but it just depends on where you are, correct? Like kind of like which cultures you're in. I mean, because there's kind of there's people who are living in modern cities, but then there's also what you're describing, and then, even like indigenous tribes and things like that who are probably even operating at a lower level. Yeah. So, is there do you have an idea of how, what the percentages of that are, what that looks like?
Yeah, I can just, I don't know the exact percentages, but urbanization is huge in Africa. In fact, we're just seeing this influx like no other. We lived in one city and we left for about 3 years, came back, and we could barely find where we had lived. The neighborhood had changed that much. Gold Kingdom, where CCC works, the capital city is the sixth fastest growing city in the world. This is in Africa. So if you look at urbanization, Africa has the fastest rate of urbanization in the world. Already over 50% of our people live in our cities. So this issue is just being exploited. With so many of our girls are moving because there's better livelihood, better chances of a job, but there's just isn't any structure or system to care for people, and so there's just a lot of oppression and injustice happening
in these types of contexts with child labor and other, when you have massive, urbanization, and with that comes increased poverty, and that's seen in things like this.
Yeah. I often tell people it's sort of like taking, a young girl, a 12-year-old out of the country here in Nebraska and plopping her down in the middle of Manhattan and saying, go for it,
Yeah.
No parents, no supervision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Becky was saying, the advocacy role is huge. Like that's one of the things that our staff have figured out well and are doing a good job at, just being there for the girls. Yeah.
That's huge. And there's so many issues inside of that. I mean, it's working as child labor, it's educating these, a lot of the families. It's not like, hey, here's natural family. Like you just do what you do to have babies, and then you have more babies, and then that just keeps growing. And so there's just not, I mean, the education piece, the cycle of poverty, unless you give an out, just continues to spin out of control for these people. And then there's no hope. And it's not like, a lot of times we're like, why would you have 7 kids if you can't afford it? Like the American construct of some of those decisions and the decision making is just not even there in a lot of these countries where poverty happens.
And it's a belief system too. I mean, it's not like having children is a blessing. So like for a man to say that he has 3-4 wives and he's got, we've met men before can't even remember all their kids' names.
Wow.
So it's a prestige thing almost. You know what I mean? It's not like they don't look at it in the back. I mean, it's changing. Like there are, as more educated people are in our cities, we're seeing people using, birth control and different things to have control the sizes of their families. It's not like, but traditionally and like the culture and values would be large. The more children you have, they don't look at it as a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we hear about acts of violence, things like that, are there, is that something that you're facing directly as far as these young children being like kidnapped or sold into slavery or sex trafficking or things like that? Is that something that's pretty prevalent?
Yeah. So if you look at the countries in the world, the worst countries in the world to be born a girl, when you talk about things like female genital mutilation, which basically means sex is never anything but an uncomfortable, painful experience for a girl, 80% of the girls, of women in the country that we work in have been circumcised. So it's prevalent. It's not just like it's happening. But yeah, it's...
And just to clarify, is that something that the parents are enforcing, or is it like
mothers
a cultural thing?
Yeah,
or?
It's mothers and aunts enforcing it. Like it's against the law now. Like the USAID and UN and big organizations have come in and like mandated, and the government has said it's wrong.
Yeah.
But you're working with people. You're working with traditional religion. There's just so much. Here in the U.S. we have this, the spiritual world is up here and our material world is down here. And so when we go in and address female genital mutilation, I can show them all the science. I can show that it could cause all sorts of, it can cause AIDS, it can cause, when they have the actual surgery, they can bleed to death. I mean, there's all sorts of different you can show the science, but when they believe in their core that if they don't circumcise their daughter, she's going to be promiscuous, or that, if the child is born and touches the woman's clitoris, then it's going to die. I mean, they honestly believe these things. So it's like, you've got to say, look, but I've got a God who's so much more powerful than any of these evil spirits or any of these spirits that you believe in. My Jesus is so much more powerful than that. You don't have to live in fear. So you have to address that spiritual realm of their beliefs and show how Jesus is so much more powerful than what they believe. You can't just say, well, science says it's gonna,
What's interesting
I don't know if I answered
is
your
that
question,
it's
but
actually, no, it's good. What's interesting though is actually it's not the men that are pushing this at all. It's the women, the grandmas, the mothers.
Aunts. They have ceremonies for it.
Yeah. So even
educated women. We had a colleague that worked for years and years and years against female genital mutilation, taught in a church about it. Then the government, when it became illegal, they would send these women through all the villages and the communities in this country just to bring awareness to it again. And she found out for all these years that she'd been working in her church, the women had just continued to, even the women in the church, to do these, to have female genital mutilation. But I'm talking so in the 6 countries, so in our region of the world, we have the 6 worst countries in the world to be born a girl. So when you talk about things like gender inequality, it's huge. I mean, an opportunity for a girl to go to school, I mean, that's so rare. 33% of girls in the country we work in are illiterate. So, are literate. So you're looking at the majority of them not being able to read or write. The majority of the girls we work with we're teaching them at 14 and 15 how to hold a pencil for the first time. So it's really, it's hard for people to wrap their minds around that there's still a world out there that's, we talk about medical care in the country we live in. The doctors that we work with at our hospital, they said the medical care in the country we work in is the same as what the U.S. had during the Civil War.
Wow.
So it's hard to wrap your mind around that.
I remember the first time watching the girls try to cut, like using scissors. I was so frustrated because they don't have fine motor skills. Like these things that we take for granted that we learned like in first grade or whatever, kindergarten, they just don't have those skills. So even like Becky said, writing, it's hilarious watching them do literacy. Like,
yeah, they learn how to. Yeah, but it's so cool because it's giving opportunity. That's all it is. Just saying, hey, you've got worth, you've got value. We have these girls are sharp. I mean, if they'd been educated anywhere else in the world, they'd be lawyers and scientists and doctors, and so it's just giving them opportunity. So it's to say, hey, you want to learn how to read and write? You want to learn a vocational skill set? Do you want to have a different choice for your future? And that's really what we're trying to do. And then where do we bring Jesus into their story? The whole picture, not just their material, not just but in their spiritual darkness as well.
Yeah.
And spiritual poverty, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to get into that a little bit more, like the spiritual side. You're not just going to help
no.
just fix problems, that are temporal and just bring relief, but other things. But I'd love to hear first, before we get into that, Shawn, so do you have a role in Hands of Honor? Do you do something different? What's your ministry?
I just follow around Becky.
Okay.
I try to keep up.
I told you I'm a chatter. I'm
Sounds
sorry.
like it'd be a good plan.
Just give me some duct tape and all
No, if you haven't realized it, we do ministry together.
Yeah.
We do life together, and God's blessed us for 17 years now to do this together, and that's a big win for both of us. But yeah, I do have different passions. As much as I like to see the girls excel, I'm usually not
awkward. I'm
usually not welcome when they're talking about female genital mutilation and other things. So a passion of mine has been relief and development. I've studied that from day one when we hit. That's where we started off with working with a local relief and development group. And so over the years, we've just tried to develop capacity with those people that we're working with, the local church, doing all kinds of different projects. But probably the biggest, most recent thing that I've been involved with is fish farming. And so as we moved into a new city in Gold Kingdom, one of the things that we were given was basically a white slate, just saying, go for it. Whatever you guys want to do, figure it out. And so we just started praying about that, and I believe that God gives you passions, and that you should work towards those passions. And if I want to be excited when I go into my job every day, basically, and I think that's probably should be true for everybody. Do you really like what you're doing? And so I've always loved fishing, and so I thought, how can we use fishing and fish in general to help combat some of the problems that we're seeing? So we started working with communities, and one of the things that came up really quickly was fish farming. It was a buzz in that country anyways, but very underdeveloped sector. And so I worked with a local community, and we started a fish farm. And it's just been cool to see how that's kind of evolved over the years. As you guys probably know, fish are highly nutritious. If you can farm them, you pretty much know how much you're going to have at the end of a 6-month harvest versus going out and maybe catching something during the day. And so one of the cool things, though, like Becky was saying, we're always looking to have that meaningful, impactful presence in people's lives. And, the fish farming piece really provided that really nicely. I could interact with the community easily, training them in a skill that was going to be profitable for them, not just for the nutrition aspect, but actually bring in money so they can send their kids to school, buy the uniforms, that kind of stuff. But part of that piece as well is just the proclamation piece of the gospel, because like Becky said, there's a whole lot more than just helping people. Our secular NGOs do that well.
Yeah, we might as well work for them if that's all.
Yeah. So what
and get paid a lot more.
So we're constantly asking ourselves, what sets us apart? What makes us different as a Christian relief and development organization? And so from day one, we started off with storying through the Bible. The guys I'm working with, they wouldn't step foot in a church. That's just the reality. And so I said, well, let's just meet under the mango tree. It wasn't actually a mango tree, it was a neem tree. But anyways, so we would just meet under this tree and just unpack the Bible for them and go through a story. And if you've ever done storying before, it's really fun because you have them repeat the story back to you. And usually they get some details off, and that's kind of fun to talk about. Well, it actually happened this way, But then by the end of the session, 2 or 3 times going through the story, it solidifies, and they're repeating that story. And then we would often challenge them and say, hey, go back to your families. In an oral culture, actually even our culture, which isn't an oral culture, being a good storyteller is just like, you're the man, right?
Yeah.
So in their culture, even more so. So they were just happy to go and share these stories in their village with their families, with their kids. And so we like to think that maybe that was a little bit of pre-evangelism, I don't know. But also challenging them, say, hey, figure out what questions people have as you're telling this story, bring them back to us. And so you kind of have that ongoing dialogue, and it's pretty sweet. So yeah, the fish farming piece is pretty big. Sustainable agricultural practices, it's all happening there. So yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. So you're meeting needs, and so every year I worked in middle school for a long time. We'd go to an Envision site in Chicago, and one of the things we loved about Chicago was, it's just like a hotbed for so many different cultures and things like that. But one of the exercises they always made us do was kind of walk around and go observe everything we see, write down every sign, the different languages, the signs in people's yards, and kind of just see culture and see people. Yeah. And then, when we would get in, they would always kind of Jesus juke it and say, no one saw any lost people, and how easily we can go through our lives day to day, especially in American culture, and maybe see needs that are physical, that are easy to tell, trash on the streets, homeless people begging, but we rarely have our eyes looking at the spiritual climate and spiritual needs of people. And so you guys aren't just wanting to meet physical needs, though I think that's a great way to have the inroad to
Jesus did.
To these spiritual needs. But how are you as missionaries or international workers, how are you taking the gospel to people? What does that look like? You shared some of that, Shawn, but how are you seeing that spiritual need as a big thing?
You just need to build a bakery next to the fish farm.
There you go.
Cover it.
I think it's by serving communities. Jesus came to be served, or to serve. And so I think that's just the model is we want to go and serve the community. Like, what are the needs in that community? Do it in a healthy way. I mean, we're not giving handouts. We're figuring out what that community, we use a ABCD, asset-based community development is the approach we use in a lot of our work. So what are the needs in this community? And a lot of those times, most often it's a spiritual need. People are living in brokenness. They're living in dysfunction, broken relationships, a broken relationship with their creator, with each other, with creation. And so bringing Jesus into that story as the one that can heal, the one that can bring wholeness and restore. So it's always from the beginning, Jesus is the answer. We're not the savior. We're not the white, NGO coming from America to fix all their problems. Jesus is the one that knows their story. He knows their brokenness. He's the one that can save them from their sin and also from the brokenness in their world that was caused by sin. So I think that's always our story, like when we go in, and that's what we're proclaiming. It looks a little bit different. You have to be a little bit more sensitive how we do that. But we're taking all of Jesus to the whole person is kind of how we like to say it, So it's all of who Jesus is for the whole of who that person is, the physical, the spiritual, every aspect of that person. So I don't know how to put it.
Yeah, it's good. I think for me, another piece of it, maybe to say it differently, is, we all bring a story. We all have a narrative that we're bringing into it. And for us as international workers in development, we bring our American story with us. And in this book I'm reading, Becoming Whole, he just spells this out so clearly. Our narrative, our story, our American story is deeply flawed. And so word. Just realizing
we're making rich, unhappy people is basically, we're saying, sorry, honey, I'm in.
No, go for it. You got it.
Seriously, I need that duct tape.
Where is that duct tape?
Let's go for it, honey.
But no, just that idea of, what is your story? And I would even challenge people that are listening, like, what is the story that you're bringing? Even as you're looking at somebody, you see everything through a lens. You're perceiving that person through your story. But if you actually stop to try to figure out what that person's story is, and there's a lot to be learned about the narrative that we bring to it.
But it's word and deed. I think so often even in the history of our mission organization and of the Alliance, we've had deed here and word here, and we kind of have this pendulum that swings. And so we had this chip on our shoulder for most of our 17 years because people didn't get us. There was always a hierarchy of missionary. You had your church planter here, and then and somewhere we fell down in that line. And so we were always like defensive, but no, it's got to be both. But now our concern is, so now people really get it. Like they love what we do. Comma is really gaining some traction. We're wanting to double in a decade. But now we're seeing this pendulum. We've been working at a Bible college for this last year, teaching there, and we're seeing this pendulum that's just swifting, and that's like, well, it's all about deed now, and proclamation is as important. You talk about evangelical, with millennials and evangelism, and half of them don't even believe we should be, sharing our faith or trying to convert other people into Christianity. So we've kind of seen that, and so we've got to find somewhere in the middle where word and deed come together.
What do you think is the catalyst for that, though? Why do you think they believe that they shouldn't be?
I don't think they want to offend. It's that whole tolerance,
comfort.
And,
Yep.
yeah, like I don't want to, that's there. It's okay if they believe that. But I mean, how badly do you have to hate that person to know the answer to all of life's problems, to know what Jesus can do in their lives, and not think that you need to tell them about Jesus? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think at the base of it, there's just not a passion for the lostness of man. People don't have enough of a passion to know that person is lost eternally, spiritually, and I think that's probably one of the bigger
even through their
issues.
life.
Yeah.
I mean, going through your life without Jesus, can you imagine? Like, why would you want anybody to have that kind of a life? Like,
and probably to answer your question, a close second is maybe we don't really have a great relationship with Jesus. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're scared. We don't know how to answer. You know what I mean? We don't even know enough of our own.
And you see almost a complacency in it. And I wonder, like, I mean, a lot of times Christians will talk about with children that there's, the age of accountability or whatever. And I think I've heard that argument played sometimes in argument to mission work. It's like, well, if we believe that, then if these people don't know about Jesus, then maybe that's for the best, right? Like they never heard about Jesus, so it's if we go bring them to it, then they're going to be accountable. Like, is that some of the thought behind that, you think, or is
I haven't heard that so much.
Could be. I don't know.
Yeah. There's just not a brokenness for the lost. Like there's this trend of like, we've talked to so many people, I want to be a missionary, but that could be here in America or overseas. Like there's not this, when we talk about gospel access, when you talk about people who don't have an opportunity, it is an injustice that I've heard that gospel zillions of times, and our kids have heard it. And there's people in this world who've never even had the chance to hear about Jesus once. So to me, that's an injustice, and that hasn't hit home for people. And so if we could really just, for people to understand that there are people in this world who are going to spend an eternity in hell because the good news of Jesus came too late for them. Like if that doesn't break your heart, then don't be a missionary. Like that's got to be where your heart's broken. We talk about, there's so much of a trend now of people working, and nothing against Envision sites, nothing against, refugee ministry here in the U.S. It is, God has brought them to our back door. We need to be in their lives. Yep. But only 3% of those people will ever make it to the U.S. of unreached peoples will ever make it to the U.S. or a place where they're going to have gospel access. There is still such a need for us to be going to the unreached peoples of this world. And so I think it's comfortable. I mean, if God's given me this calling and I can sort of appease it by just staying here in America and moving to another community here in America and being involved in ministry, that sure is a lot easier than getting on a plane and going over to a whole other country and leaving my family behind. The cost isn't as great. So I think people are taking the easy. But I don't want to say that it's not that
we have
work
here in the States.
We have a slight bias.
I don't want to say that. I don't want anybody to hear this and think, I'm just involved in work here in the U.S., so that's not important. It is important, but hey, if God's given you a call to reach lost people in this world, then you better be getting on a plane somewhere because that's where they really are. Yeah.
And I'm just happy for people to start where they're at.
Yeah.
I think that's the first start.
Yeah.
But I think come back to the gospel access piece. Like I would just challenge people here in Omaha or wherever you're at in the U.S. Walk outside your door, walk down the street, start knocking on doors and see how many doors you have to knock on before somebody can share who Jesus Christ is and what he's done in their life. And go to some places that we're working at in North Africa and other places around the globe. You'd be knocking for a long time till you could find even somebody that would be able to explain Christ to you. So
recognize that name.
They might recognize the name, but actually explain who Jesus is, what he means to you, like what he's done in your life.
Yeah. So it's about access, and that's kind of where our bent is a little bit.
Yeah.
we want to provide that access wherever we're at, but specifically where there's the least access.
Well, I think to go back to the whole lostness of man thing, I think most Americans, especially in a Christian subculture, we don't even understand how lost we are or were. And so I think that's a demotivator for us because we don't even realize how actually lost we are at times and how lost we were before God even rescued us, because maybe we've grown up in a Christian subculture where all we've known is Jesus, and we don't really understand how offensive our sins are compared to a holy God. And so it's a poor understanding of who God is, how holiness works, how holy God is, how our sins, even though we've accepted Christ and maybe we've had that moment of salvation happen in our life, we don't realize how much we still give into that lostness and how much that lostness continues to suck us in, and how much we need the gospel preached to ourselves. And so until we fully grasp on this side of eternity as much as we can in our sanctification process, how absolutely lost I am, on a daily basis I have to surrender and pick up my cross. Like, we did it one time and that's good. But how much I am entrapped and ensnared to sin, and it's nagging at me every day, even as a pastor, and how much I have to fight against that. And I am, without the Spirit's leading, without Christ, I am a mess. I'm a wreck. I'm so lost. I don't think a lot of times we understand our own need for the gospel. Thus, why would we be able to understand someone else's
You nailed it. That's
desperate need?
Yeah.
And so I think there is probably a lot of people, maybe especially growing up in a Bible college. Like I grew up as a PK, and I don't know that I really ever understood or even now fully my lostness, but the more I understand who God is and his holiness, the more I actually realize how lost and desperate I am. And so I think that's a big, that's a little rant from me, but that especially millennials don't understand in the lostness of man, because we're looking outward towards other people instead of first doing the self-analysis inward. So I think that's big. And so that's affected mission work, right? It's affected, you guys were sharing with our staff yesterday a little bit about how you've seen trends in mission work, people not wanting to give their life to it. Shawn, you shared your third generation missionary and your family members, and Becky, you second generation, like your family, like you gave your lives to doing this kind of stuff, not just like a couple months. And so what are those trends that you're seeing, and maybe some of the things that maybe you can get on a soapbox about and that break your heart about looking at missions moving forward?
Yeah. Well, let's get on our soapbox. Here we go. For just a long-term commitment in these days, I think is probably a 3-year commitment. That's what most people might say is a long-term commitment when it comes to missions, and that's really disheartening. At 3 years, you're lucky to get the language mastered, let alone even get into people's lives. So as an organization, we look at about 2 terms, which is usually 8 years, as kind of the marker for somebody who's been with us long-term, and that's on average, I think that's what we're looking at now, 8 years, which, compared to our parents who served, 25, 30 years, 40 years. For my folks, 8 years is not that long either. So, but I think part of it comes back to that lostness of man piece. I mean, you can kind of hack it out there for a while if you are excited about going out and, kind of doing your thing. I think that's actually another really important point. People come out and are trying to build their own kingdoms and not trying to build God's kingdom, if that makes any sense. We're excited about the change that we can see in this world, and that's a good thing, but we have to realize the reason behind it. What's the big why? Why are we actually doing this thing? And like I said, you can hack something for a couple years, maybe 8 years, but not much more than that. So that call to mission and that understanding of how lost you are and how lost the people are out there, and you wanting to share that has to be a big piece of what you're going to do, and your longevity is contingent on that.
But we need to do better as mission orgs too to take care of our workers, because I think we've been, a buzzword is kind of onboarding, and so as we don't do a great job always of onboarding new workers, and so those first 5 years are the most crucial when we talk about attrition. And so I think as a mission organization, sometimes people just don't get a great onboarding experience. They're not being well equipped. They're not being coached. They're not being even discipled. I mean, we're seeing a lot of workers come that actually need to be discipled themselves before they can be disciplers. Yeah. So I think even our colleges that are preparing these people as workers need to do a better job of preparing them for what they're actually going to face on the mission field. So the world's evolved. It's changed so much. There's so much diversity in the world, and the people that we're trying to reach are so diverse. And so I think, our methods have to change a little bit, and then I think just even in the U.S., you don't see people staying in their job for, years before you'd leave the same job, retire after so many years. And here it's the same thing on the mission field.
Another point to make, too, I think, is that the places where we're going now are some of the hardest places in the world. We often talk about low-hanging fruit. I think of my grandparents back in the day in Gabon, and they would have literally villages come to the Lord. Like the village chief would commit to Christ, and
everybody else had to.
Everybody else had to, or they would. I mean, you would see hundreds of people coming to the Lord.
And more animistic people groups. Yeah.
But as we're moving out of those places, that low-hanging fruit is no longer there. And we're working in places where you can go years without seeing anybody come to the Lord. And so that's discouraging.
Yeah.
And so that obviously is going to have an effect on our workers, on just their longevity, just by nature of we're not seeing anything move here.
And we need more. What we're seeing is we need hybrid workers. We need people that have that strong missiology and training and Bible school training, but they also have a valuable skill set that they can bring into community and have that meaningful engagement, meaningful, impactful presence. So I think what part of it is we're like equipping people for like church planting, but it's actually going to take probably a term or two before they even have any disciples to plant that church. So in the meantime, they're having to like figure out some sort of way to engage in that community, and it might not be any way that they've ever been trained in how to do it. So it's frustrating, and so I don't know. What
are some of the ways that a conversion is different than in the States? When you see someone, like you said, it might take years, but once that happens, is it similar? Do they react different? Is it true that the way they put their trust in Jesus might look a little different than we do here because of all we have?
So I have we had a gal. So when our girls come to faith in our Hands of Honor program, first off, we don't ever push like an altar call or because they used to be called rice Christians, like people that would just convert for the rice or whatever.
The program,
so we
benefits,
see, so we see that in our program because these are vulnerable teen girls. They want to make us happy. They're going to say what we want to hear.
Right.
So we really I've had girls to come up to me and they've said, "Oh, I want to take they call it the Jesus road. I want to," and I'm like, "Why? Tell me why. I want to understand. You need to be able to explain to me that Jesus has worked so powerfully in your heart and drew you so close and made your heart so tender that you want to follow Jesus. I want to know the why." But when our girls really sincerely do make a decision to follow Jesus, our staff always say, "Don't tell your families," which to me at first I was like, why are they ashamed? We're not supposed to be ashamed of the gospel. But they understand that they're not strong enough. They don't have a strong enough faith. They need discipled before they can face persecution, because 100% of them are going to face persecution from their families, and that's what we see. So when people come to faith in our context, they are strong. They have made a decision, and they know they're going to face persecution. We had a young gal named Hawa. So she came to faith in Jesus this last year, and so the staff said the same thing to her. Let's take some time. Let's be discipled. Let's slowly tell your family. She's like, "No, I don't want to wait until my family." She says, "I've heard you're supposed to be baptized. I want to be baptized." Well, baptism is huge. You can't take communion in our churches until you've been baptized, because it's such a significant step. It's like saying to the whole community, "This is who I am now." So, but she was just adamant she had to be baptized. So we said, "Well, listen, you've got to call your dad then, because you're under 18. We want you to, your parents are still the authority figures in your life." So we said, "If you're willing to call your dad and ask to be baptized and he agrees, then sure." So my colleague Naima told me about this, but she says she borrowed her phone to call her dad, and she was talking to her dad. She's like, "Dad, remember how I was like this miserable person? I was this terrible, always grouchy, and you guys never knew what to do with me, and I was rebellious. She says, I've changed." And she's like, "There's Jesus, and we're on the wrong road, and we need to be on the Jesus road." And here she's trying to convert her dad on the phone. And so her dad said, I think he was just so amazed at the change in her over the phone that he allowed her to be baptized. So but most people that come to faith in our context are going to face persecution. We actually have a ministry that works primarily with persecuted women, because when they come to faith, their husbands are their sole source of income. So a lot of times their husbands will kick them out, and so then they don't have any kind of way to provide for themselves. And so we have a program that helps persecuted women that come to faith. after their husbands kick them out.
I think it's probably true for us a bit, but I think in Islam, the culture is so intertwined.
Yeah.
So when somebody decides to leave Islam, they're leaving a lot of those cultural aspects, even going to the mosque and praying with your family. I mean, that's huge. You're basically saying, I'm not doing that part anymore. All the holidays, I'm not doing that part. We don't have a great correlation in Christianity to it, but it'd be something along the lines of, I'm not going to celebrate Christmas anymore, or I'm not going to, and just those big kind of cultural things that we've kind of gotten accustomed to. So in our context, that's usually, it's a big thing to ask somebody to leave. Yeah.
So a lot of times there's arranged marriages still. So when, a man comes to faith, his parents arrange a wife for him. So that there's his spouse. Like he has to go find his own wife now. You talk about health insurance. There's no health insurance. When you get sick, your family, they all chip in. It's a rotating system of whoever got help last helps the next person. So you lose your health insurance. You lose your livelihood. Hamidou that came to faith in the fish farm. His cows, that was his inheritance. That was his livelihood. Family took it away. So how is he going to have, provide for himself anymore? So it's so different when you talk about.
It's crazy to hear the risk involved for them. Risk that if they make this decision, and then like how is there temptation on their part to renounce it so they can get their inheritance back or get their husband back? Like, is that a constant battle?
Yeah, it's definitely a constant battle. I think for us as individuals in an individualistic culture, we can't fully appreciate a collectivistic culture that we typically work in Africa. And really, you're not making a decision for you. When you make a decision, it impacts the whole unit. So that's probably one of the bigger differences. So Becky kind of alluded to this, but she talked about, we want to make sure that our girls are discipled and that they're strong in their faith before they really approach their families and confront that. And I just remember when we first started working in North Africa, we were sitting down with a worker, and she explained to us that in the 5 years that she had been in this place, a really hard place to be.
Like clothes, you're not allowed to proselytize, like you can get kicked out.
But she had shared her faith well over 200 times, and I thought, that's awesome. And she said, out of those 200 times, I saw 2 people come to the Lord.
Like it was relationships she developed with people. But
and I thought, 2 people, that's great. That's pretty good numbers, actually, in our context up there. And she wasn't looking at me like with like happy face. She was like just broken down, and as she's just went into weeping, she said in both of those cases they've gone back into Islam just from the persecution. So that's a challenge, for sure. That's not an easy place to work, and that's one of the reasons why we really work with these girls to make sure that they're really well discipled before.
Yeah, speaking of risk, I know yesterday you were talking about this a little bit, Becky, when recording a video, and I was thinking that this as well. I think when we work in church ministry, we need to recruit people into ministry, and so we tell them, I work with our residency program, and I go down to colleges and I tell them why this is going to be the best program and why they should come here, and we are in a culture that is always recruiting people, and we give them the highlight reel, and unfortunately then they get to places and they're like, this sucks. This is not at all like
in the promotional video.
This was not there. Like no one told me that everything was going to get wrecked inside of me, physically, emotionally, that I was going to have to deal with my body in a different way because they don't have gluten-free, dairy-free, everything, so all of those ways. And so for you both, I think probably safety and things like that aren't. What are the struggles, and maybe this gets us into some prayer points for you guys, and then being able to close. But what are some of the uncomfortable, really hard things that you have to deal with, and that maybe you're like, I don't like to share that with people in the recruiting resources. I know you were sharing, like, I was recruiting someone, telling them they get to go around the world, all the awesome things, and then I got convicted because I was like, I didn't give them all of the truth. And so what are some of those things that we can be praying for, and some of those risks that you're just living through?
Yeah, I think for one thing is, like the loss of our family, like our kids growing up without, like on the mission field, they have aunts and uncles and they call them, but just being home this year and just seeing my kids interact with their cousins and their aunts and uncles and getting to like know them, and then know like, okay, it's probably going to be 5 years before we're all together again. So that, people have to realize that Skype is great, Zoom or whatever you use is great, to connect. And my good grief, we're so much more connected than when my parents were on the mission field. But there is definitely sacrifice in the relational piece with our families and raising our kids so far apart from each other.
Yeah, I often think that we are blessed because we come from that rich missionary heritage, and we've kind of just kept on cruising. And I think about my parents, for example. My dad wasn't second generation. My mom was the missionary. But for him to leave his family, like, that was super, super hard. And I think, especially as we're recruiting and looking at new people coming into it, family's the biggest loss by far. Just your family, number one, releasing you to do that. And then supporting you to do that in the long term. So that's a huge thing. I can probably think easily of 3 people that have gone through armed robberies. I can think of one gal that was raped. I can think of one person that received a death threat recently and had to flee the country.
U.S. Embassy calls, get out.
So those are the unsexy, untold kind of parts of this is what we deal with. Not all the time, obviously, but these are some of the realities. I think we've shared a story, and it's in the Bible. David is coming to Aranas, the Jebusites, to sacrifice on behalf of the Israelites, and he basically says, "Can I have your threshing floor? I want to build an altar." And Aranas like, "Yeah, here, take it. You guys just have whatever you need." And David's like, "No, I'm going to pay you for it. I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to sacrifice to the Lord my God something that cost me nothing." And so I'm not trying to say that in a pious way at all, but I am trying to say that it is going to take a sacrifice for people to stay there long term. It is going to take more than just kind of the fun side of missions and seeing people come to the Lord. Behind that, there's a lot of sacrifice. Yeah.
I think that if we can get anything across, joining Jesus on mission is going to cost you something. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be easy. Yeah, we do get to travel, we get fun things, but I think it's worth the cost. And I think that's what we realize in the end. Another thing I think that a lot of people don't realize, like when we go on a home assignment, we share all the great stories, right? Because that's what people want to hear. Mm-hmm. But for every Hands of Honor story I share of a girl whose life's been transformed, there's like 50, that are out in this world somewhere. Maybe some seeds were planted. We saw no real fruit out of it. And all I can just pray is that somewhere in whatever community they're in now in this world, somebody is being Jesus' hands and feet to them. They're not in our life anymore. So for every success story, there's a lot to break your heart. So I think people need to realize how hard it is. Like, yes, but it's also worth it. Like following Jesus on mission is so worth it. Like it's the most life-giving thing you can ever do is join Jesus on mission. Like it is, for all the sacrifices we've made, we would do it 100 times over.
Yep, for sure.
There's that paradox. Following Jesus will cost you nothing, but following Jesus will cost you everything. Yeah, and it's that same breath of that cost. Jesus did that. Like crowds were gathering, and they're like, "Hey, you just fed 5,000 and then 4,000." He's like, "Hold on, there are too many of you here. I don't think you get the cost that is involved in this." And so there is a great cost, and I'm humbled to get to sit with you guys today, to hear your story.
I think if I could ask one more question too, I like hearing about like how does it grow your faith though? Like when you see these things that are unfathomable, you have all the bad stories, but then you have that one story. And I think we talked a lot about like the American culture and the way that looks. And I think sometimes in America, we a lot of times Christians want to go tell each other, "Oh, you just need faith like a mustard seed," right? Like that's their favorite line to quote. And it's like, sometimes I look at that verse and I wonder, are we looking at it the wrong way? Like maybe that's maybe a lot. Like maybe that having that much faith is a lot. And, you look at these people that are working in the mission field and you hear about these miraculous things that happen. And it's like, when you're relying on God for the next thing and not like, you don't have the net, you don't have the parachute that you have here in America. It's like, that has to just completely restructure your faith. Like it's got to look so different than ours, where we're just like, "Oh yeah, just have faith, it'll be fine." But we kind of know like, "Oh well, we've got the government might help us out, or we have family that might help us out." But you're living this life really on faith. You're stepping out on faith, and it looks totally different.
Yeah, I think for us, like, and this is something we've just had to learn it's only through the Spirit's empowering. I mean, we have nothing in and of ourselves. Like, I'm not going to change one girl's heart like at all, no matter what I do. It's all through the work of the Holy Spirit in their life, and it's Him working through us. I think for us, when we talk about faith, like, I mean, yeah, sure, it's great when a girl steps out of Islam into Christianity. I mean, that's huge. But for us, we count the little wins as a team. Okay, who was able to share a story with a taxi driver today? You know, who got to pray with a neighbor that has a sick child? Who got to, like, it's the little wins, and then we have to really. That's what keeps us motivated. That's where we find our faith and our strength to keep going and just looking. Hey, look at all these little wins, because they add up, and eventually.
Yeah, I would just echo that it is the Spirit's work in people's lives, and I think that's an important thing. I remember one of the first guys I discipled, I was fresh out of college, we were just landed for our apprenticeship, and this guy was just super motivated to ask me questions from the Bible. But I remember getting to a point where we were just pretty much arguing all the time. You know, I'm like, well, this is what the Bible says, and he's like, well, this is what and I'm like, I came to a point that I was like, there's no way that I'm ever going to argue. And I was like, I can't even fathom how this guy's ever going to get to know Jesus. And I realized at that point it wasn't my job to do that. I mean, the Holy Spirit would have to work on him. And so just to come back, it is the Holy Spirit's work. We get to be there. We can plant the seeds.
We're his ambassadors. And
Yeah.
And I think maybe that is something that keeps people back too, because, well, I don't look like a missionary. I don't fit like a missionary. I can't fit in that box. But man, just whatever gift, whatever passion, whatever talent Jesus has taken you, if He's given you a brokenness for lost people, just take whatever you love doing and do it in a place where there's unreached people. Missionaries don't look the same anymore. We all look so different, and our world is so diverse. So we need diversity. We need some people with different skill sets, different passions to reach people where they're at.
You need to figure out ways to disrupt your life as well. Like, I feel like we just live here in the States in such a nice, comfortable area, and we're like, okay doing this, and we're okay going to church for 2 hours a week. But what areas is God asking you more of? Where are you uncomfortable? And lean into those disruptions, because I think that's where God's going to work the most. So,
That's really encouraging to hear.
It is. And spending time with you, I mean, it makes me feel bad to be
Want to be a missionary?
No, well, yeah. And just thinking about some of the email exchanges I've had this week that are doctrinal issues that are just like so like who wrote the song and what weird thing did they say in their book, and like we're gonna even talk about that a little bit next week about who's leading worship, and it just brings things into perspective, into so much more perspective. That we have this Christian subculture that we like to fight about just silly, stupid things that. And there's this cosmic God on the move, and
we're missing the big picture.
It's keeping us from mission.
Muddled in this,
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
And so knowing more and more about a lot of head knowledge, but keeping us from being on mission. So it's good.
Yeah, thanks guys for being here. We really appreciate it. I'm sure we could go on for another hour, but
this was funner than I thought it would be.
Oh, good. That's good. Most of our guests say the opposite. So it's really good to hear. No, just kidding. Thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate it. If you want to reach out to us, you can do that by emailing us at cccomaha. Oh no, actually it's a podcast at cccomaha. That's the email. I should remember that. Podcast at cccomaha.org, or on social media at cccomaha. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to send Shawn or Becky a message, you could send it there. We'll make sure they get it. Again, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.
No problem, guys.
Thanks. Appreciate it.